And we're going to start off tonight, as Tatika shared in the agenda, with going over some of the key findings, both of what we heard from the community and also from what we learned from the analysis that we did both on our water and challenges with water and housing. So those are going to be, those are two things that we focus on a lot with this plan. I'm going to share just very high level highlights from both of those efforts. So starting with what we heard. Here's a summary of things that we heard from across the city that we heard again and again in each area. It was not specific to one area or another. These were similarities citywide. So citywide, folks want to see our local ecosystems preserved and restored as much as possible. And having access to those is really important. Free public access for green space and water. Wanting to see more collaboration and coordination among the many jurisdictions, especially when it comes to addressing infrastructure challenges. The urban growth boundary, for those, if you're not familiar with what that term means, on the map here on the left, this dark bold line that kind of creates almost a circle around the city. This is it's a planning boundary to delineate where we want to keep rural development patterns outside of the urban growth boundary. So it's the extent to which the urban type of development can grow. And so it was really important what we heard from folks to protect that area and also better manage those transitions along the edges. Another thing we heard a lot from folks all across the city was the importance of our region's Gullah Geechee culture and history, and wanting to see that more reflected and better protected and preserved. For the economy, wanting more affordable commercial space, especially to support small local businesses. For housing, wanting a mixture of housing that can meet all needs, all income levels, life stages, household sizes, housing that's close to where people work, so we have fewer cars on the street and highways. On that note, having a more connected city, so not just for cars, but more connections, safe connections for people who are walking and biking. And finally, wanting to be more engaged, just not just in the comprehensive plan, but beyond that, and having better transparency and communication from all departments in the city. So here are some things that we heard specifically from Johns Island residents, or things that were even more relevant for Johns Islanders. So when we asked the question what people loved most about their community on Johns Island, what we heard was it's a rural community, and it's important for residents to maintain their connection with the history of the island and the nature of the island. These are things that should be protected and preserved. We heard a lot about outdated infrastructure, both roads and stormwater management. And then and new development is straining that infrastructure. We heard that, again, preserving and restoring ecosystems was heard throughout the city, but this is especially true for Johns Island, and residents wanting to see the rural and agricultural character of the island maintained, and conserving land, more land. People want to live, and at the same time, people do like the ability to live close to their grocery stores and restaurants, and having some local businesses nearby. And so, both that rural nature as well as having some types of amenities close by. And then finally, wanting to see more parks and places for recreation, especially athletic fields, and places for the community to gather, more public places than there currently are. So this next piece is, again, very high level summary of what we learned from the water and land analysis. The water and land analysis is building on the Dutch Dialogues report. If you're not familiar with that, Jim can drop a link to that in the chat. We can also share it in a follow-up email. But the Dutch Dialogues focused on 4 sort of small project areas in the city. And what the land and water analysis did was take some of those principles and apply it at a citywide level. A city plan is going to influence primarily this inhabitation piece, the development and land use. So guiding, setting guideposts for the next 10 years for development and land use, shaping the priorities for development and land use in the next 10 years. The city plan can also make recommendations about priority investments for infrastructure, including drainage and transportation networks. What we were missing to inform both of these is the ground level analysis, understanding our soil, water, and ecology at a citywide level and how we can plan accordingly. So we worked with Wagner and Ball, Water Institute of the Gulf, which Dale is with, was on the call, also local firms, Robinson Design Engineers and Circulus Design. We got a almost 300-page report from this analysis. So there's a lot more to it than what I'm going to go over tonight. But one of the things that we're using the most in terms of shaping the land use recommendations in this plan is the elevation risk zones map. And so what this does is assign categories across the city based on the elevation of the land. So there's high ground, or based on the risk that is associated with elevation of the land. So there's high ground, which is the lowest flood risk, and also there's where there's the greatest responsibility to prevent or to not worsen flooding for your downstream neighbors. The adapt zone, where flooding is infrequent but not impossible, and will likely only become more frequent as we experience climate change and sea level rise. The compound flood risk zone, this is a sort of it's a very nuanced area that's complex. There's a lot of different complex things going on with a combination of tidal flooding mixed with rainfall and runoff. And this area is kind of a sort of an overlap zone between the adapt zone and tidal flood risk zone. And the tidal flood risk zone are the lowest lying areas of the city. This is also a very dynamic zone where we will see the effects of sea level rise more starkly, and where we might see marsh actually move inland as the sea level rises. This is a zoomed in version of Johns Island, the elevation risk zones map. You can see at least within the urban growth boundary, which is on this map is it's a dark gray line. Maybank Highway is within the urban growth boundary is where we have some of the highest elevation, highest ground in Johns Island, in addition to a section along Main Road, but I believe that is outside the city limits. And here are some planning strategies that are recommended in the report for us to apply in all land use categories in all areas of the city. And we need to use a combination of these. And the exact combination of these may depend and fluctuate depending on very site-specific conditions. And so you won't see these reflected in the high-level land use recommendations or the future land use maps. Where you'll see these is how we update our zoning code and stormwater regulations. So these will be applied through a variety of policy tools based on site-specific conditions. Okay. And again, there's a lot more to that. We have a blog post that gives a more full summary. We did a water feedback session that goes into more depth on this material. So we have, if you're interested in this topic, there's more material on our website for you to browse. There's a lot more to this than what I was able to touch on tonight. For our housing analysis, we contracted with community data platforms. One of the things that we really needed was to help us understand our housing challenges was a better data. So that's primarily what this was geared toward. We also held a series of housing labs to get community input that helped to guide what questions we asked of the data and which data we collected. So first, I want to start with our definition of affordable housing in the context of this analysis. We use the definition that the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, uses, which they say that housing is affordable if the housing costs add up to no more than 30% of the household's income, annual income, that's calculated before taxes. And that's based on rent prices and mortgage, so it's not including utilities or insurance. And they categorize affordability based on a household's income, based on that household's percentage of the area median income. So to play through an example of this, if a household makes 60% of the single person household makes 60% of the area median income, that means they make about $34,000 a year. So housing that would be affordable to them under HUD's definition would cost no more than 30% of $34,000 annually. Sometimes you'll hear other terms relating to affordable housing, like low-income housing or workforce housing. And those are just referring to a specific range within the 30 to 120%. And when we use the term affordable housing in this analysis, we're referring to all of these income ranges. So any housing that is subsidized essentially to meet the income needs of anyone making from 0% to 120% of the area median income. We learned that 42% of Charleston's households are cost burdened, which means they spend more than that 30% of their annual income on housing costs. And again, that's not factoring in utilities or insurance. So if you were to include those costs, that percentage point would be higher. We also found that due to significant income disparities between white and Black households specifically, that neighborhoods with the majority of Black residents are more than twice as likely to be cost burdened as those with the majority of white residents. We also looked at this, we broke it down by area of the city. And Johns Island, we found is the highest, 63% residents are cost burdened. So we're still looking into why that number may be so much higher than the rest of the city, if it's something weird with the data, or with this Johns Island only having 2 census tracts, I think. But we are still looking into that, but that's something that is definitely worth noting that needs to be researched further. We also understand that housing costs, the cost of housing is not the only reason why people choose to live where they live. Maybe their age, their family size, how close their house is to work. So we need to look at all of these things when we are making plans for our housing needs in the future. We also need to consider, of course, the implications of sea level rise. And we learned from our vulnerability and risk assessment completed last year that 6% of residential parcels will be vulnerable to tidal flooding with 3 feet of sea level rise, which is the current prediction based on an intermediate scenario. So sort of the midline prediction for sea level rise. And we also need to factor in transportation costs. And so this graph here is looking at when we combine housing costs with transportation costs, What does a picture of affordability look like? And what happens is, you see Johns Island actually, it turns out the average, based on the average housing costs and average transportation costs on Johns Island versus the peninsula, Johns Island is actually less affordable, not by much, but those transportation costs really do add up. And finally, we wanted to understand what our housing needs are, not just currently, but with a projected population growth over the next 10 years. And so, and specifically our needs for affordable housing that the market is not providing currently. And we learned that we need approximately 16,000, we need 16,000 more units to be affordable across those income ranges that I spelled out earlier, and that our greatest need is for those making 30% or less of the area median income. For that income range, we need more than 7,000 just to meet the existing need, not factoring in future population growth. And so this map breaks down the deficit by area of the city. So building more units is not the only way to meet this challenge. People's incomes were to rise, these numbers would change. If housing prices were to fall, these numbers could change. So there's not, building more units is not the only solution, but that's certainly one strategy. And so these numbers really reflect more than anything the deficit, the gaps that we need to close. And the gap in Johns Island, over 2,500 affordable units needed. And this is my last piece that I'll share. And this is a project that is ever evolving and is still a work in progress. This is researching historic African-American settlement communities throughout the city. And the definition that we're going by has been largely shaped by residents of these communities, and is, again, sort of ever evolving. And we are always open to feedback or additional ideas for how these communities should be defined. But basically, these are communities that were established by freed Gullah Geechee people in the Reconstruction period, and their descendants. These are throughout the Low Country. Their origins and their physical landscape are very varied. Their culture is varied. Their needs and vision are varied. But the similarities are that each community has a shared history, a shared identity, strong connection to the land, and they each historically have had shared cultural institutions like schools, churches, and businesses. And so the purpose of this project has been it's just sort of a fundamental step to locate where the communities are, identify them by the name that the community knows them by, and to begin the work of being in conversation with communities about how the city can best, and the counties can best support their visions for the future. And I will stop there to see if we have any sort of just clarification questions based on what I presented.
All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, I just want to draw everyone's attention to the chat box where numerous links have been dropped in from Jim. A lot of numerous links have been dropped in from Jim. So please make sure that you have an opportunity to click and open those for reference. Okay, so if we don't have any specific questions or thoughts, we'll go ahead and
Can I just say, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I guess it's kind of alarming to me, and I agree the need for affordable housing, and I totally support it. but it's looking at what's needed, not what's happening, and seeing the amount of development that's going on in Johns Island now. When things are approved, is that not in mind in terms of, you know what I'm saying? You know, the signs I see around Johns Island is, you know, 300 and up, 300,000 and up, and they're all single family homes. You know, I don't know what's going up, you know, everywhere. You just see the lands being cleared, but, you know, I would hope that there's some kind of ratio or something so that you could get more affordable housing in the area. I'm not sure how it works, I guess.
And I might attempt to answer on this. So yes, that is definitely a concern of ours. And number one, whenever we have planned unit developments in the city, we are now working to get affordable housing in them. For example, the planned unit development that has Live Oak Square has affordable housing in it. We also are acquiring land in different areas around Johns Island, such as near the Fenwick area, where we bought 10 or 15 acres, I think it is, for affordable housing. And then we are working with other partners, such as Sea Island Comprehensive Healthcare, where they are building 80 units in front of their existing facility. And then across the street, they're going to rebuild several hundred units of the structures. Right now, they've got some one-story structures across the street, and they're going to work to build very modern 2- or 3-story buildings with very attractive units over there.
Can you tell me where that is? I'm not sure where.
Across the street from Sea Island Comprehensive Healthcare. And then there's also brand new affordable housing that has just been completed at the corner of Main Road and Brownswood. They're blue structures right next to.
Oh, I know that. That's right down the street.
Yeah,
I know
those
that.
are affordable units as well. So Johns Island has a number of things going on, and we'll have a lot more in the next couple of years. But, you know, as this data shows us, we've got a lot of work to do. But it is included in, definitely, as we review things that are needing rezonings or needing planned unit developments, we're working to get affordable housing in those developments as well.
And the Sea Island Comprehensive Healthcare is located off Maybank Highway,
Yes.
just past Main Road, by near the Angel Oak.
Okay, yes. Okay, yeah. I volunteer at the Lady of Mercy
Yes.
Community Center, and you know, I've seen I'm a real sidewalk person right now. It's my thing in terms of need, but I see people that cross the street there, and there's nowhere to walk on Brownswood to get to there or to the park. And the sidewalk that they have in front of that unit is a sidewalk to nowhere. It stops on each side of the building, and you know, they can't even walk to the grocery store or something like that in that affordable housing unit. So it might be off topic, but it just came to mind.
No, it's good to know.
I mean, I don't even think there's a sidewalk that they could walk to. What is there, like Subway and some kind of pizza place?
In that block, yeah.
You talked to somebody from the county about sidewalks up to Our Lady of Mercy from the.
Well, that was, he
housing
said,
area.
I talked to them, they said maybe with the grant, they could get something from one Brownswood, one side from Main Road to maybe the county park, because we have all these developments around here and we can't even walk to the city park.
Correct.
Because you're taking your life in your hands on Brownswood Road. But anyway, I thought about that, and in terms of the multi-unit place, that even emphasizes the need to really look at the infrastructure, you know, in terms of the traffic and stuff like that. But, and then that ties into with and maybe I'm jumping the gun, the transportation, you know, people want to get downtown or different places. I don't see any plans for Johns Island with the more public transportation, but maybe I didn't see it.
And that's something we hope to achieve with, as more things happen on Maybank Highway, that will help us be able to get a corridor route that hopefully traverse
That'd be
Maybank
great.
Highway and connect it to James Island and West Ashley. Absolutely.
Mhm. Great,
Thank you for your feedback, Stephanie.
sure.
I see a
Alright.
hand raised.
Was that,
I see a hand raised. Jamie raised a hand.
oh, Jamie Potts, sorry. I can't see that on my end, just so y'all know. I can't see hands raised for some reason. So, hi, Jamie. Please
Hey,
share your
y'all.
thoughts.
I was just curious, when you say affordable housing, can you give us a little bit better color as to what you mean by that? Like, do you guys have any guidelines for density, or is it just as many apartments as you can fit?
And it's a whole range of types of units. On Johns Island, we have affordable housing that is individual single-family houses as well as apartment units. We also, in other parts of the city, have townhouse units that are affordable, first-time home buyer units. So it's definitely a whole range depending on income levels and the need in the particular area.
I guess the concern is that, low income housing or affordable housing tends to be code for as many apartments as we can fit right here, which ends up further exacerbating the existing infrastructure issues that she's describing with lack of sidewalks. It's a safety risk for folks. You think about walking from the intersection of River at Maybank Highway, and the folks that are walking to and from their homes that have been there, since long before I was alive, and they're trying to walk next to people going, 50 miles an hour plus if they're doing the speed limit 45 miles per hour. So I'm concerned that when you say affordable housing, that it may actually be contributing to some of the problems people are describing. And we need affordable housing, but I think we need people who want affordable housing. They want some green space. They want some sort of a backyard,
I can just do a quick response to that, and then Tatika, would you like us to move on?
You can give a response, Chloe. That's fine.
Okay. So just, I would say there certainly is, just from a financial standpoint, if you can build more units on an acre, let's say you can, building 4 units on an acre versus 1 unit, you can, it is easier to make the finances work for those units to be more affordable. So there's certainly a financial component to, in terms of a relation between affordability and density. But as Christopher said, we have affordable housing that is all types of housing and is not really tied to density. The affordability of it is more determined by the subsidy amount that is making it affordable, and less about whether it's an apartment building or a townhouse or a single family home. And as we said, what we heard from the community, and you'll see in the recommendations, the housing section, which we won't get to go into to depth tonight, but I would like to point people to that, and that's in the document that I sent out beforehand. And we'll also supply that afterward, and we would love your feedback on that. You'll see in the recommendations there that we do acknowledge that people need a variety. We need all types of housing, not just apartments, not just single family homes, but all types of housing that can meet various different lifestyles, age groups, household sizes, and renting and home ownership. So we do, I hear you in terms of, not everybody wants to live in an apartment. That's not always the best solution. And so we do need to accommodate a variety of housing types. So I'll point you to the housing element and the draft recommendations that we sent out. And I guess we can move on to recommendations, since that's what's on people's minds.
All right, so recommendations will be covered by Christopher. So.
Okay. Chloe, you're going to put the slides up.
Yes. Sorry, I did need a reminder. I'd gotten distracted. Thank you. And you can see we're taking live notes so that we can incorporate your feedback afterward.
Okay, great. So some of you who may have been with us in meetings before, you've probably seen this slide, but I won't go into it in full detail, but just as a reminder that the plan is just a guiding document. It does not actually change the law on the land as far as zoning is concerned. It just makes recommendations for future changes. So it's the first step towards, defining a new vision for the city, but then it's implemented over time, over the 10-year life of the plan, via zoning decisions and other smaller plans that get into much more detail than this broader 30,000-foot look of a citywide comprehensive plan. Next slide. So it also covers 10 elements. It's technically required to have just 9 elements covered by the state, but we are including a 10th element that we're going to sum up our entire plan document with, which is the resilience element. So we're going to hopefully throughout the entire document show you how our city can grow in a way that helps us to better withstand disasters and climate change and be much more of a resilient city going forward. Next slide. So we're going to look at our future land use map. This is typically the thing that, in the way plans are done in South Carolina, ends up having the most impact to the growth of the city, is this land use map. And it's a guide for land use and development. As I said, it's not changing the actual zoning on parcels. It's just, if we're going to have changes happen, this is maybe a good way to have them happen. And it will drive those decisions for the next 10 years in the city if it is adopted as illustrated. Next slide. And there are also water analysis implications for land use. And of course, these are fairly logical ones. They are reserving the higher intensity land use categories for the higher ground zones. And we showed in some earlier slides where some of those higher ground zones are, and assigning the lowest impact land use categories, such as conservation and parks, to the majority of areas within tidal and flood risk zone. And then in between those two, we can accommodate the mid and low intensity land use categories, but there's a lot more data that has to be had as far as drainage basins, as far as drainage provisions already in place or new drainage easements that need to be obtained, the soils on the land. So those are a little bit harder to pin down as easily as the tidal flood risk area or just the general high ground zones. Next slide. So this is going into the actual recommended categories. The first is the rural areas. This is areas outside of the urban growth boundary. And this is an aerial image of the Plowground Road area. These are very low density areas where development would not exceed 1 unit per acre. And in general, in most areas would be much lower. Most of this area is outside the city of Charleston. We don't really annex beyond the urban growth boundary anymore. And they're agricultural areas and just low density residential. Then we have our suburban edge, which might be on the inner side of the urban growth boundary. And these are typically 1 unit an acre to 4 units an acre. A lot of areas of the city are in this category. Some examples might be Sandhurst in West Ashley, Shadow Moss, or Stiles Point on James Island. Then we get to our suburban category, which is very prevalent throughout the city. And these are low intensity suburban style areas, mostly single family, but a variety of mixed uses within them as well. There are 4 dwelling units an acre to 8 dwelling units an acre. And examples include Wagner Terrace downtown, Riverland Terrace on James Island, and St. John's Woods on Johns Island. Next slide. Then we have the neighborhood category, which is a little bit more urban, mostly on the peninsula. This is like Ansonboro. These are developments or neighborhoods that have 6 dwelling units to 12 dwelling units an acre. And then neighborhood edge. This is something that we have worked on in this new document to define these areas along key connectors where you're at the edge of a neighborhood and you're providing a place for those services that are needed in close proximity to a neighborhood, but they're the types of services that wouldn't do well right in the middle of a neighborhood. So an Avondale Point or that area along Savannah Highway in Avondale is a good example, where there are restaurants and shops and things like that that are at the edge of neighborhoods, and you can walk to those, and then you can also get to them by car. There's also parking there. That is a very good example of what neighborhood edge would be. Then finally, we have city centers, which is our densest areas of the city. And we have these, it used to be that the city center was viewed as mainly being the central business district downtown. But in this document, we're looking not only at that being a central business district, but there being city centers in areas like West Ashley, like at Citadel Mall or on San Rittenberg, like on Daniel Island as shown in this picture, where you have the town center on Daniel Island as part of it. On James Island, such as areas at Folly and Maybank. And then on Johns Island, such as the areas that could be created around the intersections of Maybank and River, the middle of Maybank where you've got Live Oak Square, and then also the western side or southwestern side at Maybank and Main and Bohicket, where you've got the shopping center with the grocery store and the McDonald's and some other restaurants around that area. Then we have some specialized districts such as the campus areas, the biggest one being the medical district downtown, made up of MUSC, Roper, and the VA. But we also have senior living facilities such as Bishop Gadsden on James Island, college campuses such as College of Charleston, the Citadel, and then even area high schools such as St. John's High School and the St. Francis Hospital area. Job centers, I don't think we have a job center on Johns Island, but they are areas where we've got a lot of small businesses that might be in light manufacturing or warehousing or office warehousing structures. And they don't conform to the traditional neighborhood patterns, but they don't also need to be on big highways or things like that. Examples are Clements Ferry Road, the DuPont Wapu area, Fort Johnson Research Area, and the area around the Charleston Executive Airport on Johns Island. That's right, we do the job center out there. And then the outright industrial areas, which you find in the Charleston Neck or at Signal Point on James Island, or the Columbus Street Terminal, such as in the downtown area as well. Next slide. And then the areas that are much greener because of either ownership or the level of the ground in the place. And this is the low impact and conserved areas that would see only limited development. In other words, probably no more than 1 unit an acre, and the structures that would be built in these areas would probably need to be elevated, probably up on stilts, as opposed to being on a filled in foundation, that kind of thing. And then there could also be in these same areas lands preserved via public ownership or private ownership with preservation of conservation easements. Then we have the existing natural wetland and marsh areas, and then we have parks, such as Hampton Park pictured, or the Johns Island City Park, and other parks that we're working to create on Johns Island. So this is the Johns Island future land use map. And just to highlight a few things here, I guess my cursor doesn't show on this, right? Yeah, it doesn't show. Chloe, can you use a cursor and kind of first outline the urban growth boundary, the dark line that delineates the more rural areas from the more suburban or urban areas. So the vast majority of Johns Island, over 75% of Johns Island, is outside the urban growth boundary. And then the areas that are inside that, the greater densities are in even smaller areas. Chloe, right near where you were on Upper River Road is a kind of suburban edge area. So it's near the urban growth boundary, but its densities aren't as great as what you might see closer to Maybank Highway. Then you move into more suburban areas, kind of between Murraywood and Maybank, right where your cursor is. And then that is reflected also in a mirror image on the south side of Maybank, going over to Cane Slash, and in those areas, such as Oak View, I believe it is called. And then we have our neighborhood edge along Maybank in the country areas as defined in our Johns Island plan. That's the areas that feel a little bit more rural with deeper buffers and more setbacks. And then we have our city centers at the 3 nodes along Maybank Highway. And these are reflective of what was in the Johns Island plan from 2007. Can we go to that next slide for just a second, Chloe? And these are the 3 nodes that I was describing earlier. They're designed to one day be walkable with good sidewalks. They're slow in coming, but the sidewalks are coming. If you go around Live Oak Square, you'll see all those streets have sidewalks. But we're going to get sidewalks all the way along Maybank as these things progress. The development community is required to get the sidewalks in for these. And then we're also going to be working with the county and the state to hopefully incorporate links in those sidewalk areas that already exist. Can we go back to the land use map now, please? Okay, and then also in this image, you see the settlement areas outlined. And these are areas that have been documented through Chloe's research and her discussions with the community for original kind of African-American settlement areas. And we will give these extra consideration if there are rezonings that are potentially happening those to make sure that they are in keeping with the character of the longtime communities there. And so that's kind of an introduction to this land use map. And we've been kind of showing you how it relates to the current Johns Island plan, and then how we've, of course, adapted our recommendations to deal with where the water is and where the water is going to be, and hopefully where the water won't be. And that's important. I should add that, you know, the Maybank area is some of the highest area in Johns Island. In the earlier maps that Chloe was showing, most of the Maybank area showed in that kind of green or grow or higher areas image. And it's important to understand that when we are giving our land use recommendations there. You see how much around Maybank is green, so the elevations are higher. It doesn't mean that things are going to be perfect from a flooding standpoint. We still need to slow our water down. We still need to have good tree canopy. We still need to look at our soil types, but it is an area that has less risk of rising water and less risk from storms. And then I think we are into other areas, recommendations. Yes.
Before we get to that, I did just want to clarify, Christopher, that the settlement community areas that are shown on this map are not all confirmed. So the research is still in progress. So these are sort of draft, visualized big question marks over top of them, sort of need more information as a headline for especially Johns Island. We have the least amount of information currently about Johns Island community. So just wanted to say that, especially for folks who may be watching this on the recording later, that these are not yet confirmed. We are still working on it.
This is also a map of our parks and conserved lands. We need more on Johns Island, and it's something that we'll be working on. The city is also undertaking a new Parks and Recreation Master Plan right now, right this year, and that should be adopted about the same time we're getting our comprehensive plan adopted. And I'm sure that that will have more efforts towards parks on Johns Island, where they're definitely needed given the growing population. Next slide. So the key changes in the land use map, we've kind of gone over some of these, but we're determining our areas for future growth based on the elevations. Our neighborhood edge, I kind of explained how that works as being at the edge of neighborhoods, places needed for the nearby residential areas. The low impact and preserve designation is the area that has the most impact from rising sea levels and rising storm surges. And so we're recommending that that be lower density. The city center, which is typically in areas of higher elevation, and it is an area to encompass a wider variety of urban scale development with mix of uses. And then neighborhood designation, which doesn't really apply to Johns Island because it's a denser designation. And then, as we've discussed, the African-American settlement communities. And then we have our mixed use centers from the Johns Island community plan show up as those 3 nodes that we talked about. And then the area of neighborhood edge in the kind of formally designated kind of country areas between the city centers. And then the fact that we have gone from suburban edge to suburban based on existing development and location at higher elevations. And the area around Angel Oak was changed to low impact and conserved, given the fact that over the last 10 years that has been purchased for a future park and preservation of the forest.
All right, thank you, Christopher. All right, so what we